So good evening to all of you who have joined us for tonight's Justice Now conversation sponsored by the National Urban League. I am your host, Jerika Richardson, and I serve as a Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the League. And so tonight we are kicking off our Women's History Month series on the first day of Women's History Month with two amazing women leaders. We're going to be talking about everything from SCOTUS to pay equity to essentially the state of the union for Black women in America. And yes, we're having that conversation before President Biden delivers his address tonight, because there are so many issues that really have been top of mind as it relates to Black women. And I just want to make sure that we give Black women their due tonight. And so I would like to introduce my guests. I have the inspiring Fatima Goss Graves, who is the president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, as well as a president and the president of the National Women's Law Center Action Fund. And on top of all that, she's a co-founder of Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. Fatima, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here.
And of course, I am also joined by my soror and my brilliant colleague at the National Urban League, Joy Olivia Chaney, who serves as the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at the National Urban League. Joy, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with a good friend on both ends, both boxes. It'll be fun.
Well, I'm excited. Let's just jump right in. Before we start talking about SCOTUS, I do want to give all of our viewers who are tuned in the opportunity to learn a little bit more about you all and the work that you're doing. Fatima, do you want to kick us off and just share a little bit about your work?
Sure. And I'm just so glad to be here. Joy, I have to say, is my long sister in the work and in the world. And so anytime she asks, the answer is always yes. And the work you guys do at Urban League is so very important. The National Women's Law Center actually turns 50 years this year. So, we may still seem young compared to Urban League. I don't know, but that's a really big deal for us. We were founded the same year Title IX was passed. We were founded at a time at a really important development in women's legal rights. And 50 years later, we're at some really critical pivot points again. And so you'll be hearing from us throughout the year as we are marking and reflecting about the pathways ahead. But we do law, policy, and work on our culture and our society at the federal and at the state and local level for gender justice in this country.
Well, 50 years is a huge deal. I mean, that's really half of the time. We just passed the centennial with the women's rights movement. And so you all really have been in the game. And so congratulations to you, because we know how much has happened over the past 50 years. And I'm sure it's a credit to your organization. Joy, do you want to share a little bit about your work here at the League?
Well, let me just first say, at 50 years, I'm going to up my donation to National Law Center. I have a monthly one that comes out every month, and it's too small. Kudos to you all on that milestone. Fatima is a great friend, and we've worked together alongside each other. I worked in the women's rights community before coming over and extending that women's rights work at the National Urban League at the intersection of race. And so it's so glad for all of those worlds to be coming together as one tonight, as they always should. And as Jerika noted, I am the executive director of the Washington Bureau. Second to Fatima's job, one of the best jobs in Washington, D.C. And I do get to run our policy program alongside my colleagues like Jerika, who works at the state and local level on some of our justice issues. And the Washington Bureau represents the National Urban League at the federal level. So that's Congress. Yes, I don't get paid enough. Congress is a lot. That's the administration, and of course at our coalition work, which again brings me to coalition work with Fatima.
Great. Well, Joy, you said it earlier. There has been a lot of history being made these past couple of weeks. There has been a lot to celebrate in the African American, the Black community, and the women's community. And so as we enter into Women's History Month, let's talk about the history-making news that is happening on the Supreme Court. Last week, we heard President Biden announce Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, right? 3 words, Katanji Brown Jackson as his nominee for the Supreme Court. Now, I know I was thrilled and excited, and so many women that I know that are working in the policy space and the legal community and others. I mean, we just thought she was an exciting and exceptional pick. I would love to hear from each of you, just your thoughts on her nomination. And what type of experience will she bring to the court? What makes her a standout? Joy, do you want to start?
No, this one goes. No.
I hear you.
Won't say it. She is one of the leaders of the coalition seeking to not only get a nomination, but also get it across the finish line. So Fatima, I yield to you.
Oh, you're too kind. So I have to say, we're in sort of a time where there have been a lot of tough news, a lot of hardships. And so what I have been telling people, it's okay to feel a little bit of joy about this history-breaking nominee. And when you hear from her, when you hear from Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, you see why that's the case. You see how lucky we are as a country to meet this exceptionally talented woman who will bring so much to the court. She'll bring to the court the fact that she has had a broader set of legal experience than most people on the court, from private practice to serving on the sentencing commission to clerking at every level you can clerk on, to being a judge, and she will be a judge at every level. This is someone who has had a lot of direct experience, and one of those experiences is that she's a former public defender. And what that means is she has had direct experience representing people who have contact with the criminal justice system who are low income. And we haven't had that on the court in many decades. And so you have this person who is going to be on the court with a breadth and depth of experience, and she will make history. And she will be the first Black woman to do so. And I'm sure you're like me wondering why we are hundreds of years into this country and we haven't had it yet. I'm not staying there. I'm staying in a celebration of her excellence, of Black excellence, of women's excellence. As we move from Black History Month to Women's History Month, listen, I get to celebrate all and I hope you guys will too.
Well, let me tell you what. I am a Howard University graduate and a Harvard Law School graduate. And so when Kamala Harris and Katanji Brown Jackson flanked the President of the United States, that meant so much to me, more than I hadn't even thought about it. And then I was like, oh my goodness. Oh, wait. Just excellence. You know what I was thinking about? We have had 4 years. I'm not going back to all the things. We know what happened. But we've had 4 years where we have not put high morals, high ideals, working hard, being prepared, being excellent, respecting other people, your family, aspiring to high standards. We have not put a priority on that. That has not been something that we have held out as what you should aspire to. We've sort of done a race to the bottom instead of a race to the top. And when I saw her with Kamala Harris and frankly with Joe Biden, I thought, boy, not only is America back, but American values that we do often fall short of, but we at least want to aspire to do better. I feel like we may be getting some of that back. We want our kids, we want to say, you know what, we want you to study hard. We want you to be like KBJ.
You want to be like KBJ.
I love it.
And I actually think, not just little Black girls in this country, I think girls in general in this country saw that moment, will look at that moment and think, I want to be like her. We
Yes.
need people to aspire to in that way, to bring us sort of the hope and the joy and to remind us what's possible. So yeah, there are going to be a lot of little girls in this country who are saying, I want to be like KBJ.
That's right. Wanting to be like KBJ, and the fact that she acknowledged her family, she acknowledged a higher power. She came from a background where someone had underestimated her, as many of us of all races and
I
gender
mean, Joy, I know you have a story like that.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have a story like that?
I know. Fatima really knows that I have a story like that. I came crying to her office one day with a story like that. Literally, tears. Some people don't even know I have tear ducts, but I do. And it hurt. And I overcame, but she also is a reminder that every one of us has that moment. And boy, did she really show them. And she excelled so much, she's not even thinking about them anymore. But we have to tell the story because so many of us are in that moment now. Someone is underestimating you, pulling you up short.
Yeah, we absolutely have to tell the story.
Yeah.
And we've just seen a recent wave, although we know it's always been there, of accomplished Black women that really are just shaping American society. And they're finally getting their just due. There are folks that say this Senate process is going to be grueling. And there are some other folks, there's some naysayers out there that says because she has the Harvard degree, is that really enough diversity of experience? You know, but Fatima, I think you really laid it out when you went through point by point of her resume. But I just want to hear from you all. What do you think? What should we have in store? What should we think about this process? What should we prepare ourselves for? Because I know last week we're excited. We're still excited this week, but we do know sometimes how hard a journey this can be. And so what is Judge Katanji Brown Jackson? I just have to keep saying the name over and over again because it just sounds like music to me in my ears. What is she in store for and how can we support her?
Well, can I just say something on that last point that you said around, you know, people are pointing out that, well, she went to Harvard, that isn't bringing educational diversity. If she hadn't gone to Harvard, they would say she's not qualified. And so what I say to this point is sort of, we see you. We see the efforts to diminish this extremely accomplished person who has worked so hard over the course of her career and has actually demonstrated she is going to bring a wide range of experiences that the court does not have right now. So we see that. And I think that gives an insight to the hearings. I'm going to be watching them closely. I hope all of you will be watching them closely, both celebrating her accomplishments, learning more about her and lifting that up with your networks, but also if they come for this exceptional woman, they need to know that people are standing at the ready to squash that mess.
That's right. We're not just going to scream at our TVs. We're going to call them, right? We're going to write letters. And organizations like the National Women's Law Center and the National Urban League are going to be providing tools for you to do that, right? But even if we didn't, you can always call the Senate board because we have to, that actually matters, right? And I think that it is important that we let them know that we're watching how they treat this candidate and that we have no problem with you investigating her record and going through all those things. We just want her to be treated fairly. We want to avoid nasty partisan personal attacks. We want to keep it at her level, a high level. And the world is watching how we treat her. And just to be clear, we're not going to go back. But we've had 115 justices. 5 have been women, 2 have been men of color. 1 has been a Latina. We've had no Black women. So she's bringing the diversity to the court, both in, and then how many have been public defenders, Fatima? I don't have
Well, I mean, Justice Thurgood Marshall had obviously represented a lot of criminal defendants, but he's been off the court for 30 years. So we've had a bit of a gap, is what I would say in this time. And to your point, Joy, about the world watching, how we think about our courts generally, but our Supreme Court in particular, that is core to our democracy. So I agree that the world is watching in a time where people are fighting for democracy. What people keep asking, what can you do in your own life? You can show up for your own democracy. That is one thing you could be doing right now.
Right now.
And I think the public defender point is really important, because I just remember being a young law student and interested in public interest work. And, you know, whenever folks talk to you about clerkships and the like, they always tell you really that the path there is obviously get a clerkship, but they, you know, really tell you to go into pursue prosecutorial roles. Like, that has been the blueprint. So she is really changing the game as we speak. And so I'm so glad, and for all of my friends out there that really are doing the work on the criminal side and are serving as public defenders, and oftentimes are underpaid. We'll talk about pay equity very soon.
Yeah.
I think this is a really inspiring moment and a hopeful moment for so many of for them. And while we're, go ahead, Joy.
Because it's not just about her. So we talked a lot about Katanji Brown Jackson, but think about all the women. I mean, I was the secret lobby for Fatima Goss Graves for Sister SOTUS, but think about all the women lawyers out there from a range of experiences: defense, prosecutorial, academia, private sector, who were being considered, having their shared in this rarefied air. And I remember a call we were on, and we said Black women should not be denied the opportunity to be considered for this role. There are new names that the nation knows now that they did not know before because of this. And also what this means is, if you are a law firm partner of any race, of any gender, when you see that Black girl in the office, that associate, she could be the next Supreme Court justice. It's not just sending a message to Black girls and Black women and young lawyers. It's sending a message to everyone. That there is a greater possibility out there for all people. So I think it yielded dividends that I don't even think we were all thinking about. Bigger than Katanji Brown Jackson.
That's right.
I love that. The world is on notice. So while we are talking about the Supreme Court, I did get an alert about the Senate vote, the 46-48 Senate vote to invoke cloture that on the Roe versus Wade codification, it failed. Senator Manchin was the only Democrat to vote no. So a lot is happening. We know, if we're talking about Women's History Month, we know how important Roe versus Wade have been for women, but especially Black women and other women from marginalized communities in this country. I want to just give a little space for either of you to jump in and just share any thoughts on that and what this means for us as Black women.
Yeah, you know, the three of us are a part of a generation who came up at a time where Roe was the law, right? So we have actually now multiple generations who have come up with an understanding that you could actually determine whether or not you planned a family. You could actually determine whether or not you accessed abortion care. And so we haven't had that many times in history where we have been poised to see a giant rollback in the way that we are today. If the Supreme Court follows what it has been doing over the last year, come a couple months across this country, we will be in a giantly and dramatically different space when it comes to access to reproductive freedom more broadly and abortion specifically. And I got to just be clear that, you know, some of this, like sometimes we wonk too much on the law around this. We talk about it as just Roe, but I want you to understand that that decision, that was tied not just to access to abortion care, your ability to determine your family, your ability to access contraception, your ability to determine who you are in relationships with, how you parent, all of that is the same line of cases that are hanging on a fringe with this new and radically shifted Supreme Court. And so we're in a situation where our basic rights and freedoms are being tossed up, and the folks who are going to be hit the hardest, the very, very hardest, are those who have the lowest income. And I will tell you, it'll be disproportionately Black and brown people, because it'll be states in the South that escalate first. We have already seen the state of Texas. We are actually, today is the 6-month anniversary of the state of Texas having a law go into effect that has created an on-purpose public health crisis. That was done on purpose.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I thought I would see it with the fast speed and escalation, but many of us have been saying this is coming, this is coming, this is coming. It's on our doorstep, and everyone has to pay attention. It is coming.
It is coming. It's here, really. It is here. And I think for those who don't realize what the world was like pre-Roe, you really should talk to your grandmothers, have a real conversation with them, to your moms, to your aunts, to your family friends who might be willing to share some of their stories. And if you don't want to ask them their story, ask them the story of their friends. You know, sometimes people don't want to share their business, but they'll share other people's. What happened to them? The girls in the neighborhood. What happened if you got pregnant? That is what can easily happen to us. And I think it feels surreal and it doesn't feel possible, but it is very possible. And so one of the things that the National Urban League has always engaged around reproductive health issues. But one of the things I wanted to do when I took over the Washington Bureau was really lean in, make it plain, right? Make it public, make it loud. And between Jerika and I, ourselves, we really want to make it clear that reproductive health, reproductive justice is a racial justice issue. And there really is, the facts are clear. It is a moral imperative that we ensure women have access to choice when it comes around when and how to start a family. And it doesn't just happen at the beginning of your life when you're in high school or college. At any point in your life, there are all sorts of reasons that you make the decisions that you make, and women have a right to be able to do that safely, affordably, having it covered by their health insurance. All the things. We want equity for women, and in order to have that health equity, you have to have access to reproductive health, and that includes abortion care, but also birth control, other types of reproductive health care as well. And so we are excited to be in the fight with National Women's Law Center.
And I will just say, this is also an issue that is deeply tied to voting. Part of the reason we are here, where we are in a situation where a small minority of folks, people in this country aren't going around demanding that Roe be overturned. The vast majority of people don't want this to happen, but it's able to happen. It is absolutely able to happen because you have had such dramatic gerrymandering and voter suppression. And what do people do with that power? They do things like restrict access to reproductive health care broadly. So we are watching the connection play out in real time. These are not disconnected issues.
And I mean, it is so, like reproductive health, it's one of the areas where we've seen rollbacks by the court, where we're going back in time to, pre-Voting Rights Act era. And that is incredibly scary for those of us who need protections. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, taking away voting rights protections, or someone says it, I can't even remember who said it, but it's like, standing under an umbrella and taking it away and saying, but I'm getting wet. I'm not getting wet anymore. It's ridiculous. Of course you need the protections of preclearance. Of course you need, the protections of the Voting Rights Act. And we also need to set a new standard for voting to make it easier to vote. Why would you not want to make it easier to vote and to compete in the fair market of ideas? And that's because they know that their ideas are not very good ones. And so we are in a really dire situation. And it impacts, it's why, and I'll go on and say it, it's why Joe Manchin is so important, right? How he can sync, he synced this bill. He was a part of the team that synced voting rights. He was trying to strip paid leave from Build Back Better. But you know what? I'm not going to blame him. That's his choice. We have got to make sure we expand the margins for whatever party it is that you're seeking to support. We're nonpartisan here, but we know what party has represented the work that we're doing, and unfortunately, we just don't have the margins. So you may think we have what we have, that we have control, but it's by such a thin margin. So just know, when you don't vote, or when they try to prevent you from voting, this is the outcome, and that's what we have to take with us when we go to the polls. You have to, we're going to have to overcome, and I know Jerika and I are working on a civic engagement plan for National Urban League. It's not a partisan one, it's nonpartisan. It's about making sure people know how to vote and they can overcome what's been happening at the states. 49.
Yes. So thank you both for, one, your advocacy and your partnership in this space. It is so important that we not only ring the alarm, but we educate folks, and that they understand how much power they have and how important it is to vote, not just every national presidential election or even the midterms, that they need to create a culture of civic engagement and vote in every single election that they can, state and local, school board, governor, definitely your state legislature, because we're seeing that's where all this movement, where we're seeing this So, I mean, all you have to just do is look at the map. I mean, the legislature is starting, the legislature in each of these states is really changing the tone and, creating our future and changing and shaping what our democracy looks like for years to come. We cannot take it for granted. Voting every 4 years is absolutely not enough. I also want to, talk a little bit more. Joy, you talked about the importance of storytelling, right? And talking to our mothers and our grandmothers. I want to talk about storytelling, yes, from what our grandmothers and mothers have experienced. But as we talk about equity on the court, I know that so many of us are still fighting for equity in the workplace, irrespective of what job or position you hold. So many Black women are still involved in the fight and trying to advance themselves, their community, their people, and often still face barriers. If we talk about pay, for example, Black women make 63 cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. So let's talk a little bit about pay equity. And I can say, I have had some of my own struggles, whether it's, equitable treatment, equitable pay, or being seen, as Fatima talked about earlier and Joy talked about earlier, and that now so many Black women and girls who have been doing amazing work now have the opportunity and are being seen because we have a KBJ. I'd love to hear from you all about your experience and really where the fight remains for Black women in the workplace.
Well, I'm happy to start. Joy and I got to work deeply together on issues of pay equity, and she's a deep expert on this issue too. But I think I always start with the fact that we have to remind ourselves that the pay gap for Black women in particular comes from a bunch of different sources. And sometimes we talk about the pay gap like it maybe and the pay gap actually, though, is something where we know a lot about it. We know that some of it comes from the fact that people who are doing the same job aren't being paid the same. We know that some of it comes from the fact that Black women are less likely to be in higher levels. We know that some of it comes from the fact that Black women are disproportionately caregivers for their families. And what that means, the way that shows up in your pay, is that sometimes that means you end up having to take time off. And COVID has taught us that lesson. And so there's a range of factors and beyond the ones that I even have named, but it comes down to, are you valued at work?
Mm.
Are you valued enough to be paid fairly and with dignity? And the thing that we have learned is that there's real solutions. There are actual solutions that help reduce the pay gap if we only have the energy, the willingness to actually put them into place.
That's right. And, you know, the other ways is that women are, I think Fatima said this, are concentrated in jobs that disproportionately pay less. And they don't just by happenstance disproportionately pay less. When women become predominant in an industry, oftentimes the salaries come down.
Mm.
And so there's lots of ways to look at it. One of the things that I also think is important to remember, and maybe it helps to think about it this way, when we measure the pay gap, we're oftentimes when you hear the number, you're hearing, you know, women of color, women, however you're cutting it, Latinx women, all the way in November, I think this year, or end of October. It's one of the later ones in the year always. We're comparing against white non-Hispanic men. And I know people always fight back at that. They're like, well, that's an unfair comparison. But, you know, it's all about race. But the pay gap also exists within races, right?
Mm.
So that gender also is a part of it for Black people, for all the reasons that Fatima articulated. Even when you consider that Black women are so well educated, when you consider that we are disproportionately working in some capacity, then you know that the pay gap is very real for us. And one of the things that Fatima and I did together is we, you know, it used to be that we made a huge deal about equal pay day just at one point during the year. We expanded that. Because when you talk about equal pay day in March or April, whatever, it depends on the year, you're really not telling the whole story of America. And we really insisted that we start observing, acknowledging, taking a moment to pause on equal pay day for Black women, for Native American women, for Latinx women, that we Latinas, that we are covering all the different groups throughout the year. For Asian American women who, depending on demographic, their equal pay day, you know, it could be at the beginning of the year. It can also be all the way eclipsing a year, because there are some Asian women who are very, very poor in this country. And when we do it, when we disaggregate the data, when we have those conversations, we are saying we see you, we see your experiences, and we are telling policymakers we want solutions that address your unique issue areas. This is not one size fits all. And, you know, I'll go on and say one of the things we could do to really improve the pay gap for women is we could raise the minimum wage. But you can't do that if you don't vote and you don't have enough people in Congress who are going to support that. 15, fight for 15.
Right. Well, and Joy, it's been over 15 years since we have raised the federal minimum wage. And when you think about for tipped workers, it has been decades in the making, and they are making up that very low minimum wage largely through tips. And so that, you know, that is an example of a thing that is doable, that is dramatically overdue. The other thing I will just tell you that there is research out, and there are a number of states that have moved forward with laws that say you can't set your salary based on the salary you had in your last job. Right. So they're called salary history bands. So that means that if I'm underpaid in my one job and I go to my next job, they can't say we're going to keep paying your low wage. They have to pay you based on what they find to be fair for that job in that organization. The states that have moved forward, they have found a correlation between having those sorts of rules and a decrease in the wage gap on race and on gender. Well, it makes sense. If people of color, if women are already underpaid and you have to carry that low pay from job to job, you're never going to catch up.
And this is a prime example of when you invest in women and women of color, everyone benefits. Because guess what? That salary history band doesn't just help women and women of color. It helps everyone. It helps everyone move from job. It helps even people, let's say you want a new job, but you made more in your previous job and you're seeking to re-enter the workforce, but you don't want to be, it can help you in that scenario. It helps everyone. When you invest in women of color, everybody benefits. No one should have to carry their salary from job to job. You ought to be paid for the job that you have. And that's only fair. And I think people understand that it really does benefit everyone, and in particular, those who've been disproportionately paid.
I agree with all of that. And Fatima, I'm so glad that you brought up these changes that are happening in states and local communities. I had the opportunity to serve in local government in New York and recognized the pay gaps that existed and had the opportunity to work with other Black women in policy and advocacy throughout multiple facets of city government to actually change our laws around that. And so to, know what it feels like to be a chief of staff and be a woman of color chief of staff and know that people were operating off of past salary histories. I mean, it really, if you look at it, I think some of the stats say that, a woman of color, by the time, they retire, could have lost $1 million in relation to their male counterpart who did the same work, had the same background, the same education and degrees. So we also have the opportunity, by focusing on policy and advocacy and making sure that we are occupying these spaces, to change the narrative and actually create more opportunities for ourselves and others, as Joy said before. I also want to talk a little bit about how we empower ourselves. And so we're talking about barriers in the workplace. We're talking about pay equity issues. I would love to talk to both of you, obviously, who've been occupied in the legal space, a little bit about negotiation. How can Black women who are in spaces where they recognize they are not necessarily being paid what their peers are, can you talk to us a little bit about the art of the ask? I read a book called Women Don't Ask. And I will tell you, after reading that book, my pay went up exponentially because of how I approached negotiating for job after job. I think very often we are so focused on doing a good job, putting our head down and doing the work, but we don't put as much energy into the political aspect and the focus on negotiation. So I would love for both of you who are just who have been history makers in many rights to talk a little bit to our audience about that.
Well, I'm going to give you one tip, but you should know I have kind of a controversial position on negotiation. And that is that the whole setup is unfair. Yeah. Because the employer has all the information. Mm-hmm. They know exactly how much they're willing to pay. And so I tend to spend most of my time pushing on employers to put things in place that make this whole system fair rather than putting the onus on employees. That said, there is one mistake that women in particular make that I highly encourage you to stop making, whoever is tuning in. And that is, if you're really trying to go in to negotiate, don't just talk to people who look like you. Don't just talk to other women. Don't just talk to other Black women. Don't just talk to other Black folk. You need to be having a conversation with everybody else because part of the reason the people come in too low is that the information that they have is very, very wrong. And you start talking to other people, you will be surprised in terms of our intake that we get at the National Women's Law Center. The way that people usually find out they're being paid less is totally by accident. They're at a bar and something comes up. They're having a casual conversation. Somebody left their place out by accident. You are generally talking to the wrong people on this point.
Absolutely. Oh my God, there's so many things I want to say. Like Fatima, I want to say on the negotiation part, there are also studies that say men don't necessarily negotiate so much more, but they're just like they get rewarded for it. And we don't always get rewarded for negotiating when we negotiate. So I'm just going to say that. But you're right. You got to try. And it is important to ask for what you want. In addition to what Fatima said, absolutely, you need to talk to everyone, not just the people that look like you. But you also have to ask them not just what they're getting compensated at, because there are other ways people get paid. And so, you know, sometimes we're like, let me just get the highest number. But you're not realizing, okay, well, if you're working for the C3 and the C4, somebody might be getting paid by, you know, by the C4 as well. Mm-hmm. Or if you're working in the campaign and the Senate office, is someone getting paid by the campaign and the Senate office? Are we getting parking spaces and child care credits and dog care credits and car? I mean,
and stock and getting your student loans paid off if you work for a corporate firm. Yes. IVF. I mean, there's multiple things. Yes.
All the, like, in an amazing array. There's no end to the additional perks that someone can get that might actually increase your salary. So being aware of the constellation of ways in which you can be compensated for a job, I think, is really important. And I'll say one other thing. When you are in a job, we often talk about entry levels, like when you're entering the job. When you're talking about promotions, there's a gap in promotions as well, right? And so when that happens, you also have to make sure you're chronicling the work that you do. And you are keeping track of the benefit that you are providing the workplace. Believe it or not, you know, your employer should absolutely follow the law and treat you equitably and all of those things. But I mean, it's still work, guys. You have to be able to show your value, and your boss may not just be waiting for it. So please keep track of what you bring to the workforce, the value that you're adding at your workplace, the dollars that you're bringing in, the dollars that you're saving, all of those things. And then you bring them when you negotiate, and you let them know, this is what I've done, and this is what I expect.
I love that. Tell your own story, you know, lift up your accomplishments so that folks know what you're doing and what you're contributing. I think sometimes we, like I said, put our heads down and don't keep track of that or share that enough, but it's so important. Well, I will say I could literally talk to you all night long. And I know folks are starting to get prepared for the State of the Union, but I would love just to give you each a few minutes to share some final thoughts or final words on any of the topics or any others that we haven't even touched on this evening. So Fatima, I will turn to you, and then Joy, have you close us out.
Well, thank you guys for having me. This has been so much fun. And I'm definitely going to be tuning into the State of the Union. I hope we will hear the president touch on so many of the things we talked about tonight, about the nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Katanji Brown-Jackson, about the state of the economy and how Black women are faring. And part of that is related to caregiving. And so I hope we hear a nod to caregiving tonight. I hope he talks about the crisis that we are facing in reproductive health care and abortion care in particular. And I hope he leaves us with a bit of hope and optimism about our path forward, because these are the sorts of times where we really need it. But I'm so glad that I got to spend time with each of you tonight.
Yes, this is so much fun. I'm glad I got the benefit of seeing Fatima twice in 1 week. Yesterday, we were at the White House hearing from the president and the vice president. Still great to see, right? And it's going to be wonderful to see both of them tonight. Her in her, just official role, being right there behind him, flanked with Nancy Pelosi. How inspirational. I want to see the president tonight and what's happening here in our democracy.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Really kind of drawing the connection with the importance of freedom-loving people, and that we are dealing with our own democracy and freedom issues right here in the United States. And the reason why I talk about voting rights all the time, and Jerika knows, she's talking about it too, and Fatima did as well, is it's what's at the foundation. And we have to get that right. So I want to see him talk about voting rights as the building block. and the preservation of our democracy, connecting with that with what we're doing overseas as the building block for how we ensure we have reproductive rights, how we ensure we have paid leave. Would be loving if we could get that. And I'm going to say we need the ERA as well, but we'll talk about that next time. Just as the building block for all the things that women of color, people of color, just Americans generally need. And so I'm looking to see what we're going to do on voting rights. I want to call to high morals and values around making sure everyone is able to vote. And if there are those who don't want to hear that, I want corporations to hear his call. I want civic organizations to hear his call. We need to get in the game on ensuring people know how to vote, know when to vote, and can do so safely and freely, because we are freedom-loving people in the United States.
I love that. Fatima left us with hope, and Joy reminded us that we are freedom-loving people and that we have a lot of work to do. Ladies, thank you so much. I learned so much from you in this conversation, and I look forward to having continued conversations on these issues and bringing you all back again. To be continued. Like you brought up ERA, Joy. Yes, there is more that we need to discuss. And so I just want to say happy Women's History Month again to all of those who have tuned in. Make sure you tune in and watch State of the Union because it's important to be engaged and to participate in our democracy. And with that, I will bid you all adieu and say, remember, as always, the time for justice is now. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.